The sun had set early on this winter evening, leaving the suburban neighborhood shrouded in darkness. The houses, once illuminated by twinkling holiday lights, were now dark and still. Inside one of these homes, a preteen boy named Max sat on the couch, waiting for his parents to leave. He was eagerly anticipating the arrival of his babysitter, Katie. Max had been crushing on Katie for months, and he couldn't wait to spend the evening with her. He had spent hours preparing for her arrival, cleaning his room and laying out his favorite board games. He couldn't wait to impress her. As Max's parents gathered their things and prepared to leave for their holiday party, Max's excitement grew. He heard the sound of a car pulling up outside and jumped up from the couch. He raced to the window and peered outside. It was Katie's car. Max watched as she stepped out of the vehicle, dressed in a cozy sweater and jeans. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she carried a bag of groceries in one hand. Max's heart raced as he rushed to the door to greet her. "Hey, Katie," he said, his voice cracking with excitement. "Hey there, Max," Katie replied, grinning down at him. "How's it going?" "It's going great," Max replied, beaming up at her. "I'm so glad you're here." Katie chuckled. "I'm glad to be here, Max. What do you have planned for us tonight?" Max eagerly led Katie into the house, showing her the games he had set up and the snacks he had prepared. The two of them settled onto the couch and began playing a board game, laughing and chatting as they played. As the night wore on, Max's parents headed out to their party, leaving Katie and Max alone in the house. The two of them continued to play games and chat, and Max's crush on Katie only grew stronger with each passing moment. As the clock struck 10 p.m., Max began to yawn, feeling tired from the excitement of the evening. "I think I'm going to head up to bed," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Sounds like a good idea," Katie replied, standing up from the couch. "I'll clean up down here and join you in a little bit." Max nodded, feeling a little disappointed that the evening was coming to an end, but he knew he had to get some sleep if he wanted to be awake when Santa arrived. As Max headed upstairs to his room, he heard a strange noise coming from outside. It sounded like footsteps, crunching in the snow outside the house. Max's heart began to race as he realized he was alone in the house with Katie, and there was someone outside. He crept to his bedroom window and peered outside, but he couldn't see anything in the darkness. Max's mind raced with fear as he crawled into bed. He lay there, listening to the sound of footsteps outside and wondering who or what could be out there. As he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was happening. Max lay in bed, his heart pounding as he listened to the sound of footsteps outside his house. He tried to calm himself down by thinking about Katie, his babysitter, and the crush he had on her. As he thought about her, he couldn't help but feel a sense of comfort. Katie was here to protect him, he told himself. She was brave and smart, and she knew how to handle any situation. Max closed his eyes and tried to imagine Katie in his room, sitting beside him and holding his hand. He tried to push away the fear that was creeping into his mind, but it was hard. The footsteps outside were getting louder, and Max could hear strange noises coming from the living room downstairs. He felt his body begin to tremble as he clutched the blankets tighter. He wanted to call out to Katie, to ask her for help, but he was too scared to move. Suddenly, Max heard a loud crash coming from downstairs. His eyes snapped open as he sat up in bed, his heart racing. He knew that Katie had heard the noise too, and he could hear her footsteps as she ran down the stairs to investigate. Max lay there, paralyzed with fear, as he listened to the sounds of a struggle coming from the living room. He could hear Katie's voice, shouting and screaming, but he couldn't make out what she was saying. He felt a sense of panic rising in his chest, and he knew he had to do something. He got out of bed, feeling his legs shaking beneath him, and crept to the door of his room. He opened it slowly and peered out into the hallway. It was dark, and he could barely see anything, but he could hear the sounds of a fight coming from downstairs, and he knew he had to help Katie. Max took a deep breath and crept down the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he saw a group of intruders in the living room, struggling with Katie. Max froze, his mind racing with fear and confusion. He had never seen anything like this before, and he didn't know what to do. But then he remembered something his father had taught him. If you're ever in trouble, his father had said, just shout as loud as you can. Someone will hear you and come to help. Max took a deep breath and shouted as loud as he could. Help! Help! Someone, please help us. The intruders turned to face him, and Max felt a surge of terror as he realized how outnumbered they were. But then he saw Katie's face, and he knew he had to be brave. He charged at the intruders, trying to push them back with all his strength. He felt their hands grabbing at him, trying to drag him away. But he fought back with all his might. Finally, he felt a pair of strong arms wrap around him, pulling him away from the intruders. He turned to see Katie, her face bruised and bloodied, but still determined. We have to get out of here, she said, grabbing Max's hand and pulling him towards the door. We have to find help. Max nodded, feeling a sense of determination rising in his chest. He knew that they had to be brave, and that they had to fight for their lives. As they stepped out into the darkness, Max felt a sense of fear and uncertainty wash over him. But he also felt a sense of hope. He knew that he had Katie by his side, and he knew that they would make it out alive. Max and Katie ran through the dark streets, their breaths coming in short gasps. They had no idea where they were going, but they knew they had to keep moving. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the intruders chasing them. Max felt a surge of panic as he realized that they were getting closer. He looked over at Katie, who was running beside him, her face set in determination. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but she didn't seem to care. All that mattered was getting to safety. They turned a corner and saw a small convenience store up ahead. Max's heart leaped with hope as he saw the lights shining from inside. Maybe they could find help there. They ran towards the store, their footsteps pounding on the pavement. Max felt a sense of relief as they reached the door and pulled it open. Inside, they found the store owner, an older man with a kind face. He looked up as they burst in, his eyes widening with surprise. Please, you have to help us, Katie said, her voice urgent. There are people after us. They're trying to hurt us. The man's expression turned serious as he realized the gravity of the situation. Quick, come with me, he said, motioning for them to follow him to a back room. In the back room, Max and Katie collapsed onto a couch, panting and gasping for breath. The store owner went to the phone and dialed 911, speaking urgently into the receiver. Max felt a sense of relief wash over him as he realized that they were finally safe. But then he heard a loud banging at the door, and his heart sank. The intruders had found them. The store owner quickly hung up the phone and rushed to the door, locking it and pushing a heavy shelf in front of it. Max and Katie huddled together on the couch, their hearts pounding with fear. They could hear the intruders banging on the door, trying to break it down. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the door flew open. The intruders burst into the room, their faces twisted with anger. Max felt a surge of terror as he realized that they were outnumbered and outmatched. But then he saw something that filled him with hope. The store owner had grabbed a baseball bat and was standing in front of them, ready to fight. Max and Katie watched in awe as the store owner swung the bat, hitting one of the intruders in the face. The intruder fell to the ground, clutching his bleeding nose. The other intruders rushed forward, trying to overpower the store owner. But he fought back with all his might, swinging the bat with incredible speed and accuracy. Max felt a sense of awe and admiration for the store owner. He had put himself in danger to protect them, and he was willing to fight until the end. Finally, the intruders were beaten back, and they retreated out the door. Max and Katie were safe for now. They thanked the store owner profusely, and he smiled kindly at them. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll make sure you get home safely." Max and Katie felt a sense of gratitude and relief as they stepped out into the night. They knew that they had been lucky to survive, and they knew that they still had a long way to go before they were truly safe. Max and Katie walked down the dark streets, their hearts heavy with exhaustion and fear. They had no idea where to go next, but they knew they had to find a safe place to hide. As they walked, they saw a light shining in the distance, and they felt a sense of hope. Maybe it was a house, a place where they could find shelter. They approached the light, and they saw that it was coming from a small cabin in the woods. The cabin looked old and rundown, but it was better than nothing. They approached the door and knocked tentatively. There was no answer. Max tried the door handle, and to his surprise, the door opened. They stepped inside, and Max closed the door behind them. They were in a small living room, with a couch and a few chairs scattered around. There was a fireplace on one wall, but it was cold and unlit. Katie walked over to the fireplace and looked at it wistfully. "If only we had some wood," she said. Max looked around the room and saw a stack of firewood in the corner. "Looks like we're in luck," he said, grabbing a piece of wood and walking over to the fireplace. He lit a match and touched it to the wood, and soon the fireplace was crackling with warmth. Max and Katie sat down on the couch, basking in the glow of the fire. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the sound of the fire and the wind outside. Max felt a sense of peace and contentment, something he hadn't felt in a long time. But then he heard a sound outside, and his heart sank. It was the sound of footsteps, coming closer and closer. He looked at Katie, and they both knew what they had to do. They stood up and ran to the door, barricading it with a chair and a table. They heard the sound of someone trying to force their way in, but the door held. Max and Katie stood on either side of the door, ready to fight. But then they heard a voice calling out from outside. "It's me, Jake," the voice said. "I'm here to help." Max and Katie looked at each other, unsure of whether to trust the voice. But then they heard another voice, a familiar voice. "Let him in," the voice said. It was the store owner from earlier, the man who had saved their lives. Max and Katie quickly removed the barricade and opened the door. Jake stepped inside, a look of relief on his face. "I heard what happened," he said. "I came as soon as I could." Max and Katie felt a sense of gratitude and relief as they saw Jake's friendly face. They knew that they were safe for now, with friends to protect them. Together, the four of them sat around the fire, talking and laughing. They talked about their families, their hopes and dreams, and the challenges they had faced in their lives. Max felt a sense of belonging and camaraderie, something he had never felt before. He realized that even in the midst of danger, there was still hope, still love, and still a chance for a better tomorrow. As the night wore on, Max and Katie fell asleep on the couch, their heads resting on each other's shoulders. Jake and the store owner sat in the chairs, keeping watch over them. For the first time in a long time, Max felt truly safe, truly at peace, and he knew that, no matter what happened next, he would never forget this night, this safe haven in the midst of chaos. Max woke up to the sound of shouting and gunfire. He jolted awake, his heart racing with fear. He looked around and saw that Katie was still asleep next to him. He shook her gently, trying not to wake her too abruptly. "Katie, wake up," he whispered. "Something's happening outside." Katie woke up with a start, her eyes wide with fear. They both stood up and listened, trying to make sense of the chaos outside. They heard the sound of breaking glass and the shouts of angry voices. Max knew that they had to move fast, before the intruders found them. He looked at Katie, and they both nodded. They grabbed their backpacks and headed for the door. But as they stepped outside, they saw that they were too late. The intruders had found them. There were 4 of them, all dressed in black and carrying guns. Max and Katie froze, unsure of what to do next. One of the intruders stepped forward, his face covered by a black mask. "We've been looking for you," he said. "We have orders to kill you." Max and Katie backed away slowly, their hearts pounding with fear. They had no weapons, no way to defend themselves. But then they heard a sound behind them, a sound of running footsteps. They turned around and saw Jake, running towards them with a baseball bat in his hand. Jake swung the bat at the intruders, hitting one of them in the arm. The intruder cried out in pain and dropped his gun. Max and Katie saw their chance and ran. They ran as fast as they could, their hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline. They heard the sound of footsteps behind them, and they knew that the intruders were following them. They ran towards the woods, hoping to find a place to hide. As they ran, Max looked back and saw that Jake was still fighting off the intruders. He saw the determination in Jake's eyes, the bravery and selflessness that had saved their lives. Max felt a sense of gratitude and respect for Jake, a feeling that he had never felt before. He realized that Jake was more than just a friend, more than just a protector. He was a hero, someone who had risked his life to save theirs. As they ran deeper into the woods, Max and Katie heard the sound of a helicopter overhead. They looked up and saw a searchlight shining down on them, illuminating their path. They ran towards the light, hoping that it would lead them to safety. They heard the sound of gunfire behind them, but they didn't stop. They ran and ran, until they finally saw a clearing in the distance. They ran towards it, hoping that they had found a way out. But as they got closer, they saw that it was a trap. The intruders were waiting for them, their guns trained on Max and Katie. Max and Katie looked at each other, knowing that this was the end. They closed their eyes and waited for the worst. But then they heard a sound behind them, a sound of running footsteps. They opened their eyes and saw Jake, running towards them with a determination in his eyes. He swung his bat at the intruders, hitting one of them in the head. The intruder fell to the ground, unconscious. Jake turned to Max and Katie, his face covered in blood and sweat. "Let's go," he said. "We can make it out of here." Max and Katie nodded, and they ran towards Jake. Together, the three of them ran towards the searchlight, hoping that they had found a way out of the chaos. Max, Katie, and Jake ran towards the searchlight, hoping that it would lead them to safety. They heard the sound of gunfire behind them, but they didn't stop. As they ran, Max felt a sense of relief and gratitude. He was grateful to be alive, grateful to have survived the attack. He was grateful to have Jake and Katie by his side, to have friends who had risked their lives to save his. But he was also scared. He didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if they were truly safe. As they reached the clearing, they saw a group of police officers waiting for them. The officers had their guns trained on the intruders, who were lying on the ground, handcuffed and defeated. Max felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had made it out alive, and the intruders had been caught. The officers rushed towards them, asking them if they were okay. Max and Katie nodded, but Jake was badly injured. He had been hit in the head during the fight, and he was bleeding heavily. The officers called for an ambulance, and Jake was rushed to the hospital. Max and Katie waited anxiously, hoping that Jake would be okay. After what felt like hours, the doctor finally came out and told them that Jake was going to be okay. He had a concussion, but he would make a full recovery. Max and Katie breathed a sigh of relief, but they knew that the aftermath of the attack would stay with them for a long time. The police interviewed Max and Katie, asking them what had happened. Max told them everything, from the moment they had seen the intruders outside the house to the moment they had escaped. The police thanked them for their bravery, and Max felt a sense of pride. He had never thought of himself as brave before, but now he knew that he was capable of standing up to danger. As they left the hospital, Max and Katie walked hand in hand. They talked about what had happened, about how scared they had been, and about how grateful they were to be alive. Max looked at Katie and realized how much he cared for her. He had always had a crush on her, but now he knew that his feelings went deeper than that. He took a deep breath and said, "Katie, I know this might not be the right time, but I have to tell you something." Katie looked at him, her eyes full of concern. "What is it, Max?" I think I love you," Max said, his voice barely above a whisper. Katie looked at him, her eyes widening in surprise. But then she smiled and took his hand. "I think I love you too, Max," she said. They hugged each other tightly, feeling the weight of the attack lift off their shoulders. They knew that they still had a long road ahead of them, but they were ready to face it together. As they walked home, Max felt a sense of hope. He knew that the attack had changed him, but he also knew that he had come out of it stronger. He had learned that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it head-on. He had learned that love could give you the strength to overcome even the darkest of moments. And he had learned that even in the face of danger, there was always hope.